What are they going for there?
Well,
what is the goal there?
The goal is to tell Black people that we're victims, that discrimination and racism remain major problems in America when in fact they don't. And they want Black people to vote for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party gets 95% of the Black vote. And the reason they get it is because Blacks are convinced that the #1 issue facing the country right now is social justice, racist white cops, discrimination, systemic racism, microaggression, whatever new word they come up with. And it's a bunch of nonsense. The #1 problem domestically facing this country is a breakdown of the family. And President Obama said it. I didn't. A Black kid, or kid, not just a Black kid, a kid raised without a dad is 5 times more likely to be poor and commit crimes, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, and 20 times more likely to end up in jail. So you're far more likely to end up in jail without having a dad than you are because of a white racist cop.
The idea that the U.S. is somehow systemically racist in its essence is a accusation that's really troublesome to me, because I don't just think that it's merely a lie. I think it's an anti-truth. Like most lies are lies that are sort of like truth, but a little bit, they have the details are modified here and there so that people can get away with whatever they're lying about. But now and then you hear a lie so egregious that it couldn't be farther from the truth.
How can you argue that racism is not a driving factor in income inequality?
Because it has nothing to do with race and everything to do with culture. And when you have a culture that doesn't, and when You know what? Explain to me. You explain to me why black kids aren't graduating high school. Explain that one to me. Explain to me why black kids are shooting each other in rates significantly higher than whites are shooting each other. Explain to me why 13% of the population is responsible for 50% of the murder. Explain to me why the number of black kids in prison, not for innocent reasons, not for walking down the street and getting pulled into a prison, is so high. Explain, if it has nothing to do with culture, explain to me why the single motherhood rate in the black community jumped from 20% to 70% in the same course of time that the civil rights movement has made such tremendous strides. Is America more racist now than it was in 1960? And if it is, please explain to me how that happened.
Have
That
you
is-
been discriminated against?
Yes,
By whom?
by white people.
What did they do to you? Tell me what happened to you.
They told me that I needed to wear my hair a certain way in order to be groomed.
Who told you that?
All right, a supervisor.
At your job?
Yeah, at a previous job.
At a what?
A previous job. I don't work there anymore.
So you were working at this company and you went in, you applied for the job, and you, at the time that you were applying for the job, you told them, if you pay me X amount of dollars, I would come every day and I will follow your rules, and you took the job, right? Is that right?
Yes,
I'm sorry?
yes,
They can't hear you.
yes.
They can't hear you, Michelle. Come on. So when you agreed to do that job and follow their standards, their rules, you didn't mean it?
Yes, I did, but
You-
culture is,
you didn't mean
everybody
it?
has different culture.
Do you think that race plays a part in wealth distribution, or either a mindset that you can't or
Today?
cannot? Yeah.
No.
You don't?
I don't. Hey, you and I, we're proof. Why would race have anything to do with it? Put your mind to what you want to do and go for that. It's kind of like religion to me. It's a good excuse for not getting there.
You know, I said, and it's probably get me in trouble, but I said to some of my colleagues recently, so I know that it's an issue, but it seems like every single day on television, I'm talking about race, and it's because of the news cycle. It's in the news, but sometimes I get so tired of talking about it. I want to just go, this is over. Can we move on?
And if you talk about it, it exists.
Right.
It's not like it exists and we refuse to talk about it, but making it a bigger issue than it needs to be is a problem we have.
Those who deny systemic racism often argue that society is colorblind, emphasizing individual responsibility and meritocracy while downplaying the role of historical context and systemic factors in perpetuating racial disparities.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Speak Your Mind. I am Pastor Giovanni, and we're going to be together in this following program to give you guys different topics so that you who watch us right now at home or at the comfort of the office or wherever you may find yourself can speak your mind. We have telephone lines that are open and are at your disposal. So if you want right now, 877-785-8700 or through WhatsApp, 437-233-9815. And what question are we asking today? The following about racial equality. Mrs. Audrey, I know that there are a lot of people who feel as if that is something that still exists. Now, Ms. Audrey, we are asking everybody the following: if racial equality is something that's still necessary or if it's something that is over-exaggerated. Good evening.
Correct, Pastor, and welcome everyone again to another episode of Speak Your Mind. And like always, we have our Telegram poll that you can go ahead and participate of. And also, like we mentioned, you're more than welcome to go ahead and give us a call, send us a text message, and we'll be reading your comments here live on our show.
And definitely we will be reading, we will be attending your call and listening to you guys. You guys can say whatever it is, but please, obviously, no bad words. We want you to speak your mind. We want you to be able to let us know what you think about this topic. Now, we got another question for you. Has systemic racism been overly emphasized? Do you think it's something that's forced on us? Well, I want you to pay attention to this following video, and we'll be right back.
Is systemic racism a problem in Canada?
There is systemic racism in that it's built into the structure of our society. For the large segment of the population, it is invisible or non-existent, but it is a growing problem as we get a larger non-Northern European population who we need to do important jobs and we need to include in society but have failed to do so.
I think it is. Yes. I think recognizing it is a step forward, and then we can start about addressing it and taking again the right measures to do it.
Do believe that it does exist, and I believe we see the manifestation of that in our everyday life, whether we like it or not. For me personally, I think the worst discrimination in this country is definitely the Indian Act that basically made the Aboriginal victim of all kind of systemic dysfunction of our society.
I mean, we like to think of Canada as the better version of the States, and we don't have a problem here like we have in the States, but I don't think that fully represents Canada. We have a big issue. We have murdered and missing Indigenous women. That only became like something that we talked about in recent years when it's been a known problem for many years. So I think in terms of Indigenous relations, there's a lot of work to be done. And there's like some work that's being done that's just starting now, but it's long overdue.
Well, there is, but you cannot see it. As somebody came from a different background, I would see it sometimes, not a lot. I grew up in different countries. I grew up in Europe. I grew up in Russia as well when I was young. So over there, it's clearly see it. Over here is much, much, much less. But you can feel it sometimes as a racism or difference of the people over here. But very low, comparing to the other countries in the world, I mean.
Yeah, I think so, for sure. Especially right now, we see a lot of the problems going on in Digby with the lobster fishing. So I think people should be super aware that it's still an ongoing issue.
I'm a school teacher, so I've studied the residential school system and how that has affected the generations that came out of it. But also the ideologies that implemented that system, the same structures, the same family compact that put the structures into place originally that would do that sort of atrocity of a system, that's still in place.
Yeah, I think it's a problem for some people in Canada. Some people recognize it as a big problem. Other people may not recognize it. I think that's the challenge of systemic racism, and the movement around it is for people to help people recognize it a little bit more. And I think that's the state we're at in Canada now.
Definitely. I think it's a problem worldwide. Everywhere. It's been there, it's still here, it's not going anywhere until we address it head on.
It's really hard to tell. Even though I'm a part of the visible minority, like I've been treated well here and people are respectful. I have lots of friends, different backgrounds. So yeah, I think it will be different for every person.
I think definitely within the Indigenous community, especially, I think obviously like Black people are discriminated against as well. But I think because we have such a large population of Indigenous people, and that has been like an ongoing like issue since the very beginning of Canada, like I think it's definitely an issue still today because nothing's changed really.
Not in my world. We talk about that quite often. People at the pubs or whatever, you could have a multitude of races and whatnot, and we all seem to get along. It's the elites and whatnot that seem to be creating the problem. In fact, we see this quite a bit with with be it sexism, racism, it's pitting man against woman, Black against white, through the media.
I think to say that it isn't would be completely untrue. I think probably there's racism still all over the world, but definitely Canada is not immune to it. And to deny that it exists would be to put the people who suffer from it in a position where they're not being seen and their issues are not being heard.
I don't think it is. A lot of other people do, but I myself don't think it is. I think it's blown out of proportion a lot, and they're using it as a way to try to get their wants across to other people. And I don't know. To me, I think Canada is a lot less racist than a lot of other countries, for sure.
Racism is never going to be something that doesn't exist. How you feel racism is a completely personal experience. Personally, I think that when I deal with people that have seen the world, traveled the world, I don't necessarily feel any form of racism. When I deal with people that are more unhappy in their own skin, I feel a certain tension that has nothing to do with me, but with them and how they see my differences as a trigger for them. So personally, I'm fine because I never had any problem.
Yes, I think it's a problem everywhere. It's just finally being addressed. It's been made more aware as to technology and the ability to film. That's really just brought it to light a bit more. I think it's always been an issue. It's just finally being addressed right now, and it's gonna, with how long it's been going on, I think it's gonna take time to earn trust back and fix that problem.
Before we get to our first caller, we have Ms. Audrey with some comments already.
Yes, so we have here Vikram that said, I had immigrated to Canada last year in March. So far, I have not experienced any racism whatsoever. God has been kind to me since I moved here. I found a job and a place to live. People are great and speak to each other independently of race and color. This is the best place to raise a family in my eyes. I am in love with this country. God bless Canada. And we also have Hugo that says, in his opinion, the only discrimination that I have felt was in Quebec because I did not speak French. So I learned French and life is good and life is good. So that's what he says in his opinion. And we invite you all to continue sending in your comments. And don't forget to join our Telegram poll that you can go ahead and scan the QR code as it appears on your screen.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mrs. Audrey. I think we have now our first caller. Let's see if we can connect them now. Hello, do you hear me, Walter? Hello, Walter?
Hello, yes, I hear you perfectly.
Walter, we were asking everybody the following about racial equality. Do you think it's something that still we need to fix? In other words, because of racism here in Canada, or do you think it's something that's already past its time? It's something that's over-exaggerated?
I mean, as for Ontario from the time being, I've been given 12 years in Canada. As for Ontario, I feel like there's a better progress. I mean, Ontario moved forward from all this racial profiling that's, been a common thing with the racial profiling, discriminating, stereotypes. For Ontario, I see a step. But from where I grew up in Montreal, there's a lot of work to be done.
Now, Walter, you are now in Ontario, but originally you spent a majority of your time in Montreal. Do you notice a difference in provinces when it comes to racism?
Yes, I do notice a difference. Like, for instance, in Montreal, because I live there, I can only speak up a place like this. Like Montreal, there is a lot of, selection when it comes to racism, whether if you speak French or you're a foreigner, the treatment might be a little bit different. It won't be kind of visible as a first impact, but if you really investigate the case, if you really see how the treatment is being with other people who don't speak French or from outside of Montreal or the country, the treatment is more different. It's more like a stereotype treatment that people be having.
And now here in Ontario, specifically Toronto, like you had mentioned that you're in now, do you notice that type of racism here in Toronto?
I mean, not as much. For sure, if you go to higher fields, let's say when it's higher fields, higher jobs, with demand more criteria, of course, there will still be this barrier. It's still something to be fixed. It's still something that you gotta work out. And I believe there is. I don't see in the lower field, but when it comes to more higher fields, higher positions, for sure, I believe there is. Yeah.
So you think, Walter, then, for example, what you said about Montreal or Quebec, it's more for, I guess there's more difficulty when it comes to not speaking French. Did I hear that correct?
Exactly. Of course, since they create a territory that speak French, it's the only place that speaks French. They try to give more value to French. So if you don't have the language, you kind of exclude it. You kind of have less disadvantages. If you don't speak French.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Walter, for speaking your mind with us. Have a good night, okay?
Thank you. Have a good night.
I was about to speak French to Walter and say bonjour, but it is what it is. We're going to see what the streets of Toronto had to say about our topic. We'll be right back.
Oh, in my opinion, I feel like things are getting better. Like, I've been here for like 4 years in Canada. I never had experienced someone being racist towards me.
I would say often.
All my experience in Canada are like, people are very friendly. Like, even if you're just walking on the street, they will say hi, they will greet you hi. And so far, I don't experience any racial discrimination at all. Especially, I'm a Filipino, and it's my first time to go here in Canada. And people are so good to me.
Do you believe that Canada is doing enough effort to try to change racial equality?
Not enough, definitely.
Are schools working towards racial equality, or are kids being taught that it's okay?
I'm not too familiar with the school system, but now there's one big issue, like the what gender issue, and then there were protests and counter protests. People were talking. I mean, sort of kids, they still have their rights. It has to be addressed, and they're covered under the sort of Canadian Charter of Rights. Yeah, so that's an issue.
I mean, when I was going to school, there was no fights, stabbing, and gunplay. I guess in the black community, they've been discriminated and they react.
My young son, who is a black boy, from kindergarten coming up, and now and then I will question him, how do you find it at school? She said, Mommy, I never experienced racism in my school with him as a black boy. And he excelled to the highest. So therefore, the teachers did not give him a lower mark than he deserved. He get what he deserved. And they give him the drive to move on, to excel.
I think it's everyone's responsibility. I think it has to be parents. I think it has to be the school system. I think it has to be employers. I think it has to be government. I think it has to be our corporations. I think it has to be media. I think everyone has a role to play. And I don't think it's, I think we sometimes overcomplicate this, but I think we're better when we're more diverse and working together. It's a better economic impact. It's a better social impact. So it's better for society. I think it's a big deal and we got to get it right.
Kids should be taught like first at home. Because whatever kids see at home, they will like. Whatever see kids at home, they will be like influenced by their parents. So if their parents are teaching their kids to be nice, if they are outside, if they are outside their house, they will be kind and nice as well.
What is one thing that should be done immediately that could start to help more changes?
I think it's a good question. I feel like part of what we can do is just make it part of our everyday conversation, just normalize these conversations, allow people to feel comfortable about, having conversations about race and making sure that it isn't only discussed when an event or an incident comes up.
Do you feel like it's improved or it's getting worse?
The older generation theme about racism, it's phasing out in the young people. Young people are thinking differently.
It's a complex topic. I think there's certain pockets and segments of the population where I think there's a lot more awareness and people are talking about it more. I don't know if we've made the transition to actually making the change. I think there's a lot of work to be done, especially in certain parts of the city and the country where I think it continues to be a problem for sure.
Oh, that's interesting. I think it is a complex issue, but it can be addressed. I think it's from all levels of society. I guess parents, the system, the school, the teachers, and so day-to-day interaction like now with you. I'm glad you have this interview at school.
People are people. We're all the same blood. There's no difference. So I look at you as another human being just like myself. And I will treat you equally. And I expect that from you too. But in the new generation coming up, there's a lot of changes. We're moving forward.
Canada's not racist, but when Olympian Ben Johnson was winning gold, he was Canadian. And when he was found using steroids, he was Jamaican. No.
My country's not that racist, but
Canada's not racist, but I'm still asked where I'm from and why I speak English so good. What else am I going to speak? French? No. Canada's not racist, but the Canadian government up until 1996 supported Native education by sending young Native children to church-run, God-fearing schools where they were raped, abused, and taught how to be white. Sounds like a summary of White History Month to me. Canada's not racist, but the Canadian Reserve System forces Native populations away from urban centers. You know, separate the blacks from the whites. It's just like how I do my laundry. Or apartheid. Canada's not racist, but during World War II, we loved the Japanese so much, we made special camps just for them. Canada's not racist, but our neo-Nazis go on international television, get DNA tests, find out they're 14% sub-Saharan African, and then go back to buying land in North Dakota so they can create the white Mecca. What even happens in a white Mecca? Would you like some tea? Yes, please. How would you like it? Black. Canada's not that racist, but we love parading our totem poles, chanting our Native traditional chants at sports events on stolen Native land.
please welcome the First Nations of the Prairies.
That makes up for genocide, right? Canada's not racist, but French-speaking Canada hates English-speaking Canada, and English-speaking Canada hates French-speaking Canada, and Upper Canada hates Lower Canada, and Lower Canada hates Upper Canada, and they all hate people who look like me. Canada's not racist, but when two South Asian Canadians were made national sports anchors, many hockey fans rushed to display their disgust. Because, you know, NHL commentary has a big old sign that reads, whites only. Canada's not racist, but in addition to having a knack for bringing home the hockey gold, convincing you we're not American, we also don't investigate the deaths and disappearances of thousands of Native women. Canada's not racist, but in 2007, the Quebec government decided that religious minorities were asking for too much special treatment. So a commission was formed, and it came to the conclusion that the Quebecois were racist, but sadly, still Canadian. And if there's anything we've learned today, it's that Canadians aren't racist, so whatever.
We're talking about how anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, and other forms of racism are actually embedded in our government and in all of the institutions that our Canadian government allows to exist.
Political leaders across Canada have rushed to condemn systemic racism in the aftermath of protests condemning the way Canada governs and polices marginalized populations. But activists warn that without understanding what systemic racism is, the people at the very heads of those systems are just talking the talk without walking the walk.
We don't have a Canada without the Indian Act. We don't have a Canada without residential schools or the reservation system. We don't have a Canada without slavery and segregation and all of the things that those produced.
Akwasi Owusu Bempa says systemic or structural racism is baked into Canada's history. Systems developed during the colonial era colored who had access to education, who could gain wealth, and who could hold political power. Those systems continue to have lasting impacts with results that are still felt today.
Things like school disciplinary practices, the ideas and beliefs that were propagated and shared during those times influence how teachers perceive children's behavior. They influence how employers perceive the potential intelligence or work ethic of job applicants, and they influence how, organizations that I study, like the police, decide who they're going to stop and search.
Today, Black women are one of the fastest growing Canadian prison populations, despite making up a fraction of the population. And the Conference Board of Canada reports Black Canadians earn only 80 cents for every dollar white Canadians earn. Author and activist Desmond Cole says while the Prime Minister has talked a lot about systemic racism, his government has sued to stop a Human Rights Tribunal ruling on funding for Indigenous children in care.
The Human Rights Tribunal has said exactly what I just said. This is racist. It's not fair to give First Nations kids on reserves less money, and the government has to immediately equalize the funding. What has Justin Trudeau been doing instead? he has been fighting First Nations people in court so that he doesn't have to equalize the funding.
Now, Cole was able to provide a long list of examples of Canada failing to address systemic racism or indeed benefiting from it, most recently failing to obtain the consent of the Wet'suwet'en people before attempting to build the Coastal GasLink pipeline through unceded territory. In Ottawa, Xiaoli Li, City News.
And we're back with your program. You can keep calling us right now in this moment, 877-785-8700, or through WhatsApp. Mrs. Audrey, this person can send us a message completely free, 437-233-9815. Before we answer the next caller, do we have any more comments?
We do, Pastor. We have Candace that says like this: I am extremely patriotic and I love being Canadian, but I have been saying for years that we have problems when it comes to racism, but no one here wants to even acknowledge it. Of course, we're not as bad as our neighbors, but at least they talk about it and seem to want to come to terms with racism in society. As long as we keep pretending we don't have it to this day, nothing is ever going to change. Here we also have Greg that says racism may never go away in any part of the world. What happened long ago may not be right. Events in history that have happened should not be forgotten, but remember on how to handle things. I believe everyone needs to put aside race and religion and simply care for each other, being human beings regardless of what has happened in the past.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now I think we have our next caller. Let's see if we can put them on the phone now. Rachel. Hello, Miss Rachel. Do you hear me?
Hi, yes, I do.
Perfect. Miss Rachel, we're asking everybody the following question about racism, especially here in Canada. Do you think it's something that still exists? In other words, we need to push forward to have racial equality, or do you think it's something that's over-exaggerated? You think it's something that's really not that necessary?
I know I haven't been here in Canada for a long time, but I have seen it, and I do believe that it still is an issue.
You said you've seen it. Can you walk us through a little bit of what you've seen?
There have been incidents. I know that sometimes on the bus there'll be little incidents, not even with me, but I know there's some with just little comments from people that you hear on the bus, from either people in front, sitting in front of them, that is looked at as racism.
Now, Ms. Rachel, if you don't mind me asking, your parents are from what country?
They're from Mexico.
And I'm guessing you would be a first-generation North American, correct? America, Canada, all of it.
Yes.
Do you or have you, growing up, ever been a victim, you or your family, of racism?
Definitely I've been through it. I have gone through racism in schools. I know my parents, because of maybe not being able to speak the best, have gone through racism situations.
So how do you think, Ms. Rachel, maybe here in, for example, in Ontario, in Canada, how do you think we can go about, because you said you don't have that much time here, so I'm guessing you're from another country. Is there something that your country does that can maybe be implemented here in Canada?
Oh gosh. Honestly, right now I can't think of anything. I think racism is a hard way of trying to make it better to avoid racism, but it is something that is very difficult, and it is something that you can't really try to make someone stop as much as we can all implement. But I think we can keep on trying as much as we can.
Ms. Rachel, thank you so much for speaking your mind with us. Have a good night, okay?
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. And I want to have you guys already segue into our second segment. Does systemic racism actually exist here in Canada? Pay attention. We'll be back.
Canada has been really good at convincing itself and the world that the terrible things that come out of colonization somehow didn't happen here.
There's no systemic discrimination. There's no system in Quebec.
Thank God that we're different than the United States.
Their denial is part of the system of systemic racism.
It's an inaccurate history.
This country was founded on systemic discrimination.
We don't talk about the origins, where it comes from, how our whole society is based on white male superiority.
Systemic racism is the normalizing of racism.
It's not directly in your face.
Systemic racism is something that touches every corner of our country, every corner of our institutions.
Commissioner Brenda Lucki said she struggled with the term systemic racism. Later, the commissioner said it does exist in the RCMP.
We definitely have that in the RCMP, and we are not immune to it at all.
These are institutions that were built with the intention and the understanding that they were not really to service people who are not white. There are these myths that we are so radically different from the US. Both countries are founded out of stolen and colonized land. Both countries have attempted genocide on indigenous peoples. Both countries have long histories of slavery.
It's easy to point somewhere else, and it's another form of gaslighting.
In Canada, we talk a lot about, the Underground Railroad, Black people escaping slavery and coming to Canada. But we don't also talk about how after the end of the Civil War in the US, that many of those same Black people went back to the US. And why did they go back? Because on the other side of the border, things were just as bad.
The police target and brutalize and kill Black and Indigenous peoples. We're literally paying for police officers to brutalize and kill us at disproportionate rate.
One of the officers shot him dead.
Moore was shot and killed by a police officer.
I don't understand how someone dies during a wellness check.
The family says the 29-year-old was alone in the unit with officers when she plunged to her death.
Inexplicably killed. Rodney Levi, shot by RCMP.
The ones we see in the media now are just the most recent ones. We've had hundreds and hundreds of cases of brutality and violence, sexualized violence, killings that have never been addressed.
Let's look at the ways this structure has historically been used.
People who were enslaved would run away because they were property, not only labor, they were labor and property. Their masters, the owners would want them back, and they would hire people to go catch them. And police forces emerged out of that.
The whole purpose of the RCMP on the prairies specifically, but across Canada generally, was really to suppress Indigenous dissent.
They were also used to take children, put them into residential schools, not follow up on complaints of the sexual abuse that was going on there.
Black and Indigenous people make up nearly 40% of our federal prison population, while comprising less than 10% of the general population.
So much of the interpersonal stuff that happens between people that policing is now involved in can be better handled in communities when communities are given and have the resources to deal with interpersonal conflict.
A CBC News investigation 2 years ago found nearly half of Canadians who died in encounters with police since the year 2000 were mentally distressed.
We've come to a moment in our culture where to call someone racist is seen as more offensive than the person's racism.
When we call it out, we get told that it doesn't exist. We get told that we're being radical.
Jagmeet Singh, the first federal party leader of color, called a Bloc Québécois MP a racist, and when he wouldn't apologize, was ordered to leave the chamber.
It started with a motion on systemic racism in the National Police Force.
Je l'appelle un raciste et je le crois.
Singh says it wasn't just a Bloc member's decision to oppose his motion on systemic racism that angered him, but a gesture that accompanied it.
I looked back and I saw that MP not only say no, but make eye contact with me and just kind of brush his hand, dismiss it. And in that moment, I got angry.
What Jagmeet Singh was saying to this person, you are actively engaging in upholding racist systems. thereby, by definition, you become racist.
Mr. Singh did the right thing in analyzing the gesture, naming it for what it is, and naming the minister for his behavior.
Then the media focused all attention on Jagmeet, who was kicked out of the house for refusing to apologize. Where is the focus on the person who enacted the violence?
The Bloc's leader today said Singh owes MP Alain Thédien an apology.
Me or our team, our MPs, are anything but racist people.
So Mr. Singh became the problem, not the minister with his dismissive gesture.
If our own leaders can't call it out and name it and hold people to account in Parliament, what does that say for our ability to hold anybody else to account and weed it out?
It has to be individual change. It has to be change in policies, practices. It has to be systems change.
Systemic racism is recognized as a significant issue in Canada by many experts, organizations, and communities. It manifests in various sectors, including employment, education, criminal justice, healthcare, and housing. Indigenous people, Black Canadians, and other racialized groups continue to face disparities in these areas due to historical and structural factors.
He said, "How much alcohol do you use? How much alcohol do you use?"
After getting questions like that from doctors and feeling roughly treated by medical staff at a Winnipeg hospital, Sadie North and her family decided to speak out.
People like my mom shouldn't be made to feel that she had to defend herself when she's sick.
North's story is one of many surfacing after the death of Joyce Echequan. The Atikamekw woman filmed her last moments at a Quebec hospital, being verbally assaulted by medical staff. The video sparked protests, along with a meeting between federal ministers and Echequan's loved ones who pleaded for help. Today, the federal government hosted an emergency meeting on systemic racism in the healthcare system.
We're starting to talk about this in a way that hopefully will honor the legacy of Joyce Echequan.
The ministers heard from hundreds of medical experts and leaders, some of whom say federal health transfers should be held back if provinces don't act.
That's a strong, heavy-handed stick, and it should be played.
And in the middle of a pandemic, I think it'd be careless to suggest that.
But Ottawa is signaling there could be strings attached.
It's too quick to make leap to conclusions about what we might do if it doesn't happen. I am confident that we're going to be able to make significant improvements.
The Grand Chief of Echequan's community hopes politics won't slow the pace of change.
We don't want to be stuck between a battle between the provincial and federal. That's one of the main things.
Now both levels of government will come up with proposals to address systemic racism in the healthcare system. They meet again to discuss those in the new year. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Ottawa.
The chorus of voices demanding social justice and change as the Black Lives Matter movement gained momentum rang loud and clear in 2020. It spurred promises from major firms across Canada to do better. More than 450 CEOs signed the Black North Pledge against anti-Black systemic racism, taking aim at unconscious bias and committing to the creation of truly diverse teams. 18 months later, have those words translated into action? A KPMG poll of Black Canadians in early January shows nearly 70% felt their employers were making progress to create more inclusive and equitable workplaces, but 12% felt that what they were seeing was lip service, and 1 in 5 said their employer was taking no action. 84% say they want to establish targets for hiring and promoting Black Canadians with measurable outcomes and accountability mechanisms. And the same number want to see more Black representation on boards of directors and among management. According to KPMG, addressing the complex problems requires a multifaceted approach.
Working to partner with more Black businesses, hiring to make sure that you are getting a diverse pool of candidates, and putting in place mechanisms to help with the retention of Black employees.
Polly Watkins says even though she's climbed the corporate ladder in her career, a major challenge has been imposter syndrome, despite being very qualified.
You're often in a room where you're the only woman of color. You're the only person of color sometimes. And in the automotive industry, which is a very white male-dominated industry.
The takeaway for employers across Canada is that progress has begun, but the job is far from done. And the commitment needs to be revisited regularly, not just during Black History Month.
We cannot have inclusive and diverse workforce and a welcoming environment if we don't have everybody sort of coming along on that journey.
Equity in the workplace is a goal that ultimately stands to benefit all workers. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
And now closing into the final moments of our program, I think we have Giselle on the line. Let's see if we can connect her now. Ms. Giselle, do you hear me?
I do. Hello.
Good evening, Miss. We're asking everybody the following question about racism. Do you think racial equality is something that we need to emphasize? Or do you think that it's something just being over-exaggerated?
I think being in the time that I've been here in Canada, I've been here for almost 2 years, the amount of racism that I've seen is almost none. I've seen some certain situations where people have had this issue right in front of me. I was at a store one day, there was this woman who was, she caught this man stealing, and when she called him out on it, to try and hurt her, to try and, like put her down because he got caught, he started going with racial slurs, telling her to go back where she came from. And that was like the only time I've ever seen something like this happen in Canada. In the US, it happens like very often, but here, that was the first time I've seen it. I think Canada, when I moved here, it's a very multicultural place. Like in the US, you see people from different places, but here there's so much more diversity. And a lot of people are very respectful and tolerant with each other. It's very, very minimum that we see it amongst the people. There was this man that you guys had an interview from. He said that the media is usually the one who portrays more of racism, where not everyone sees or feels that there's a lot of racism in Canada. And I think even more so, I know that I might like bother some people saying this, but if you notice in the interviews, the people that are saying there is racism were white people the majority of the time. The Black people didn't feel it, or they said that if it happened, it didn't bother them, which is something that I think that because racism is something that is taught, if we keep exaggerating it, you're going to teach people that it's normal, that it happens all the time, that it's okay if it happens. But if you just recognize it and teach people to be tolerable, then you're fine. It will eventually end. Of course, there'll be instances like I've seen, but it will be to minimum. It will be a minimum.
Now, Ms.
And
Giselle,
it won't be inexistent.
what would you say then to the people who, for example, in some of the reports that we played, they said that racism has always been a factor here in Canada. Like you said, no, you compare it to the US. As we've seen so many stories, whether it's Eric Gardner, George Floyd, things that have to do with, somebody, it resulting in death, it resulting in murder. Do you think it's exactly the same as the US, or is it lesser in your opinion?
I believe that it's way less. I know that during those cases of George Floyd, where they had in the US, where they had the riots, they weren't really protests, there were more riots during the nights. They were protesting for these things, but the majority of the time, I was there, I was present in downtown LA while the Black Lives Matter was going around marching, I was present. The majority of the people that were marching weren't Black people. They were Hispanic and whites. The people going out at night looting the stores were white and Hispanics. There was no Black people present. So it really goes to show who's feeling these things or who's portraying this narrative of that racism is a thing that needs to change, or that, you know, obviously racism is bad, but it's not one of the main issues. Of course, here in Canada, it started the same way the US, it started with slavery. And even the Indigenous women that have suffered a lot of issues, you know, people have been raped, people have been murdered, people have disappeared, and no one's investigating this. That's wrong, of course. That's racism. The government is being racist towards these people, not giving them the rights to their cases be solved or to know anything about them. So compared to the US, Canada is not as racist, but there are certain situations where they need to do more work. There needs to be more work done. I think the US should take an example from Canada and see how like racism here is to a minimum.
Ms. Giselle, thank
exaggerated.
you so much for speaking your mind. We really do appreciate you sharing your opinion. Have a good night, okay?
Good night. Thank you.
And with that being said, Ms. Audrey, I think we have the results of our poll.
Correct, Pastor. We have here with the question being said, is racism a problem in Canada? 9% say absolutely not, everyone is welcome. And 91%, the majority, says, of course, there is racial discrimination. And I even wanted to mention as well, as we were hearing the reports, you know, someone had said it would actually even be ignorant to find someone to say that racism doesn't exist here, because it does. However, it may not be on a certain scale, right? But they say it's you can say it's ignorant to see that people that have been a victim of discrimination, of racism, you know, they have felt this problem, this issue. But as Giselle even mentioned, as she spoke her mind, you know, it's not a big issue as opposed to maybe in other countries. And we've had many people here speaking their mind, different sides, that they have shared their perspective on this topic here tonight.
Thank you so much, Ms. Audrey. And one of the things that I was noticing, especially when we got the topic earlier this week, is that in the time that I'm here in Canada, I think majority of Canadians have done a really good job, and I think someone said it already, in accepting the diversity that exists here. In my short time, I've already met people from Sri Lanka, from Fiji, from the Philippines. I've met people from China. I've met people from Portugal, from Brazil, from Mexico, from Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia, from every part of the world that in another country I wasn't used to. But if it's one of the things that I can say is that I think most Canadians have done a really good job. And that is me not saying that it doesn't exist. Racism does exist. But it's kind of like certain problems that we go through. There will be problems that in our lives we face, but then there's that one situation that we can't ignore, that one situation that needs to be resolved. Now, different than racism, which is something that's going to take time, maybe you have a problem that you haven't resolved yet. Maybe you've been diagnosed with an illness. Maybe you just left the hospital right now and the doctor said that you have an incurable disease. Or maybe in the morning, you finally took the decision, or your husband, your wife, they left you. And now you have a void, or you're depressed, you have anxiety, you have schizophrenia, bipolar disease, you don't feel good. We want to show you that that problem has a solution, just like it did for Fernanda. I want you to pay attention to her story, and when we come back, we're going to be praying for all of you. We'll be right back.
When I was 10 years old, I suffered from a sexual abuse by someone. And ever since that day, there was a change within me. I started to question God, why that happened to me. Inside of me, there was a void. There was hate, anger. I had anger towards my mom, my dad, because I blame it at them as well. I would tell God, God, just take my life. I can't take it anymore. I would go to sleep. Before I go to sleep, I'll tell God, just take me. Like, I'll be better with you than being here suffering. I keep blaming myself and everyone around me. I keep hurting myself because no one was hurting me. I was hurting myself. Well, I became very, very rebellious. I would yell. I would talk bad to my parents. I would take it upon my brothers. I would take it upon everyone around me. I would hurt everyone's feelings. I was very prideful. I had a lot of anger. I didn't let anyone talk to me. I didn't let anyone get close to me. Once I got to high school, I had a lot of friends. I became really popular because I just wanted to keep forgetting everything. I would look for in the friendship. And then I had a boyfriend at the time. I got with him, and then I started doing things that I wasn't supposed to do with him. I would go to parties. I would start to drink. In family parties, I would drink as well. The alcohol got my attention. Then I turned into edibles because, I didn't like smoking. So I would turn into edibles with weed on it. One time I got really, really high. I don't even know what was on the thing. Ever since I got high that day, things became a lot worse. All that turned into anxiety. I had very bad anxiety. At nights, I would wake up screaming. I would wake up crying with panic attacks. It was very bad. There was nights I couldn't sleep all night. One day, my mother invited me on a Friday, and she told me to come. I came. So I listened to my mother. I went with her, and then she's like, we're having a vigil. You should stay as well. It's going to help you even more. So I listened to her. I was like, okay, I'll stay. I listened to the pastor, and I let everything out. I let all the anger, all the pain that I had towards this person, I let it out that day, all the anger. I let it out that day, and I told God how hurt I was, that I couldn't take the pain. I let everything out, and I felt so relieved after. I felt so relieved. I've never felt anything like that. I started to see the change. All the pride went away. I started to see that I was not prideful anymore. All the hatred, I didn't have hatred in my heart. All the sadness was gone too, and I became more happier. I had more peace. I started to see that I had the anxiety. I was able to sleep at night. I was no longer angry. Like, nothing would get me mad. Like little stuff that was so unnecessary. I didn't get upset. I started to talk to my mom differently. I started to have a full conversation with my mom. She became my best friend again after coming on Fridays. And then on Wednesdays, I came as well to seek the Holy Spirit. And then until one day, I received the Holy Spirit. I received a certainty of the Holy Spirit being within inside me. And it was this true happiness, this true peace. I couldn't even stop smiling. I was smiling at everyone. I wanted to hug everyone. I don't know, I just saw everyone so differently. I saw everything around me differently with different eyes. Like, it was a moment that I would never forget when I received the Holy Spirit. And then I started to see even a bigger change within myself. I started to see that I had, love for the souls. I started to show more love for my brothers because they would be like, you don't even love me. You won't even hug me. You don't even look at me. Now they're like my best friends. Or my three brothers, they're like my truly friends. Like, we do everything together. We go out to eat together. We hang out together. We do everything together. And now with my mother, my father, I go out with them as well. We go out with the family. We go together to church. We do everything together now. And before, it wasn't like that. Before, I would be the one that wasn't even around them. Today, now I'm healed from all the trauma, from the hatred that I had against God, from the hatred I had against everyone around me. I'm healed from the depression. I'm no longer sad. I'm no longer feel that void inside my heart. For you who's watching this program and that's been molested, has been raped, that's been hurt by someone, I know how it feels. I understand that there's a void inside of you, that there's a pain that you feel like you're alone, that I know it's hard. I know that it can hurt you. It could traumatize you. But I'm telling you that there is a God out there. There's a God that can truly help you, that can take away everything that you're feeling at this moment. Come to the Universal Church. I invite you. As I overcame depression, I overcame the hatred, the anger, the sadness, the void that I had inside of my heart. I overcame all that thanks to God. Because He's the only one that can help us. He's the only one who can set us free from all the evil stuff that we have around us, inside of us.
Prepare a glass of water or get closer to your television screen. At this moment, we will have a special prayer to your name.
My Lord, my Father, I pray right now for this person who watches me, and just like Fernanda, they have problems from their past. There's situations, my Lord, that they still haven't been able to resolve. that in Jesus' name, you who watch us, you who are listening now, be free. I extend my hand to this person, and in Jesus' name, be free from all evil. Be free from the insomnia. Be free from any evil that has been torturing you, in Jesus' name. And that when they drink of this water, that it can be a spiritual medicine for their body, for their mind, and for their soul. In Jesus' name, amen. Let us drink of this water now, in Jesus' name. Amen. 2420 Dufferin Street, this Sunday at 10 o'clock in the morning. We invite you to be part of our gathering of faith and miracles. If you want to see what it is to have a great number of people seeing the power of God, well, you also can join us. You can take the 29 bus or the 929 bus, and you can end up right in front. There we are, Dufferin Street and Bowie Avenue. We're about a block and a half from Eglinton Avenue. 2420 Dufferin Street. A new life waits for you. God bless. Thank you for allowing us in your home. We'll see you soon.
Sunday,